I almost need an entire episode dedicated to introducing my guest today. His bio is extensive and exciting, and I could talk about him for hours about any number of topics. But today we are focusing on exploration, ecology, environment, and the learnings that businesses can take from the world of science. So I'm joined today by Paul Rose, one of the world's most experienced divers, field science and polar experts, and he operates at the front line of exploration, helping scientists unlock and communicate global mysteries in the most remote and challenging regions of the planet. You may also recognize him from his work in television and radio, or perhaps even a viral video clip. So, welcome, Paul Rose. How are you?
Hello, Dan. Great to be here. I'm absolutely fine, thank you. And I'm looking forward to this session.
Oh, well, it's great to have you here. And thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule, because I know you're often jet setting around the world in various exotic places. But let's find out more about you first. So we always ask our guests the same question, which is to do your best to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
All right, Dan, thanks very much. Well, my name's Paul Rose, and as you well said, I do work at the front line of science. And I'm very fortunate in the fact that I'm not a scientist, but my whole career has been meeting science groups and individual scientists with big ideas, big, hairy hypotheses, and converting those ideas into high performing teams, icebreakers, helicopters, submarines, divers in remote and challenging places. And I have to say, it's incredibly satisfying. From a man like me, I've got no science background except I know what they're up to. And I love that sense of working in science support in remote places and that sense of converting a hypothesis into real action is a beautiful thing. And that's me.
And well, what a great intro, and very succinct. And one thing we did talk about, and this is not to downplay all the amazing work that you do, but one particular excursion of yours involved you going viral. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, very luckily, the kind of work I'm involved in is easy to understand. It's visual and it's fun. And I've had a couple of experiences. I've had a big experience online when I met a breeding tortoise in a remote Seychelles island. And that was very funny. We were sitting on the grass filming as part of the land filming for my remote Seychelles atoll expedition for National Geographic. And we were sitting watching this mating tortoise as a part of sort of background color, a bit of a sort of gap and a pause between the underwater work.
Yeah,
And this huge tortoise, they're very big, aren't they? 100 and something years old,
yeah.
just came wandering towards us and theoretically chased us. I mean, he was keen for us to back off, and so we did.
Chased as much
But
as a
then
turtle can, yeah.
exactly, and he stuck with us, this huge tortoise, and he just it's sort of, I mean, I say chased, I could easily have run away, but it was very, very funny the
Yeah.
way and very understandable. We were a long way from him, 100 yards with a long lens, and he got his eyes on me
Yeah.
as if to say, I don't like you and I'm going to chase you away. It was very funny, and that thing has got about 22 million views on
Doesn't it
on
just? Yeah. So if
YouTube.
you've not seen it, you need to make sure you go on YouTube and have a search for it, because it is very good.
Very, very funny. And the second one, of course, was when I got jumped on by the polar bear in the Arctic, and we tried to keep that quiet, but it never worked. And of course, if you put something about man being attacked by a polar bear, then inevitably people watch. So there you go.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't seen that one, so I will look out for that one. I was even amused by a still that you've got, and you seem to have run-ins with a lot of animals, because I'm on the About Paul page on your website, and there's you being in your scuba gear with having your head nibbled by what looks like a husky from an iceberg. Which, if you were to try, I was saying to my producer before this that it almost sounds like a viral. It sounds like an AI prompt that you would put in to get an image.
Yes, so shortly after having the polar bear jumped on me, our bear dog, a beautiful bear guard dog up in the Arctic, was very nervous about me diving.
Sure.
Always wanted to be close to me. And on the very last ice dive, when I popped up through the hole in the ice, he was determined that I wouldn't dive again. So he bit me on the head and hung on.
Yeah, right. Just to keep you protected. Well, it's a great picture, and yeah, you can obviously any of our audience can go and have a look more about you on your website because it certainly makes for a fascinating read.
I've still got the
And as
scars
we've
right here on my head.
yeah, absolutely. As we've kind of talked about, and it's become evident that your bio is certainly extensive, and you've achieved so much. What is there anything on your sort of to do list? What else would you like to achieve?
Well, I would very much like to work in the deep ocean abyss. Mostly
Mm,
I'm working with National Geographic Pristine Seas, and our submarine is good to 400 meters, which is a long way down. And we will have a new sub at some point next year that will go to 1,300 meters, which
yeah,
opens up a whole lot more of the ocean. But I'm very envious of people that have been able to work in the deep ocean abyss. I've always fancied being there. And I think I'm past the opportunity of being an astronaut, but for many, many years, I dreamed of going up in space. So it's the big gaps that are left for me now. And I think maybe dreaming of those will help keep me going.
yeah. Yeah. That well, I mean, to be honest, the deep ocean terrifies me. It doesn't. It's not on my to do list whatsoever. Not a chance.
You
So
never know, Dan.
I'll.
You might try it and you might like it.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe. Well, you're more than welcome to invite me along, mate. That would be absolutely wonderful.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And what about looking back then? So, is what's been your most proudest moment of all the things you've done?
All kinds. I'm having a good life, and I always think of Scott. My son Scott is a constant source of inspiration to me. So I
Mm,
can't sort of look back without that wonderful moment of wow. We've got this fella called Scott in our lives, and that continued sense of pride and inspiration. Um, Naturally, it was the Queen's Polar Medal. I was very lucky after I think this was my ninth year as the base commander of the British Antarctic Survey at Rothera Base. I was in Buckingham Palace receiving the Queen's Polar Medal from the Queen herself, and it was something that I never thought would ever happen to me. It's a beautiful thing, and it's right next to me, right here. Is the polar medal? Anytime I need a little bit of a boost, I sort of look at that thing. And
yeah.
my current work at National Geographic Pristine Seas, I've been in this role now for 11 years, and
Yeah.
we're successful. We're doing good things, and it's nothing inspires like success, does it? And as we're working so hard and we're having these successes, um, it really is genuinely a rewarding and beautiful life experience to be part of a team that is helping to protect the world's oceans.
Yeah, well, I certainly it's a hot topic right now, isn't it? With the way we are looking after, or perhaps not looking after our oceans, and we are sustainable or sustainability is one of the biggest words that's out there at the minute. In fact, we as Impact we surveyed over 500 global CEOs and senior executives recently, and we asked them about their sustainability challenges, and over 90% of them said they are taking some tangible steps, whether that's through accreditations, ESG, or working towards net zero. So, but there's still a long way to go, of course. So, transforming organizations into sources of positive impact won't be easy, I guess. But from your perspective as a leader, what do you think organizations should be prioritizing?
It's a good one, Dan, because you're right, and obviously companies and business leaders are right to look at accreditations
Mm,
and measurables. Yes, we are signatories to this, or we have this a goal towards net zero, and all the things that they might support. But I think it needs to be a bit more tangible, something that people can see and feel and touch. And I think organizations need to be actively involved in global issues,
yeah.
ground truth them themselves. I mean, one way is to look at, say, take a step back and look at the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals, and look at them. And maybe there's one or two in there that either the business leaders have a resonance with, or
Mm,
there is indeed a direct connection with their activities and their
Mm.
sustainable development goal, and focus on that. Focus on one or two goals that
Yeah.
really have some meaning. It could be anything. It could be pollution. It could be overfishing. It could be the 30 by 30, protect 30% of the planet by
Mm.
2030. Human rights, deforestation, conservation, you name it.
Mm.
And as you rightly say, ESG, conservation finance. But I think it should be something that's directly linked to the business or the effect of that business. And I think the best way of doing that is to get people in that organization, everybody,
Mm.
actively involved, get them to the front line. It may not need going to remote challenging places. It could be something in their home territory,
Mm.
maybe even on their own land or with their own people, but invite speakers in. If let's say it's pollution there, they feel is the trigger, is the one they can really get a hold of, that will have a resonance with their team, has a resonance with their suppliers and consumer base and their professional and private networks.
Mm.
And in that pollution, why not invite guest speakers in? Why not go to public events where there's someone speaking or learning about it? Why not get involved in pollution campaigns themselves, physically doing it? Why not engage the company team to be informed travelers, so when they go on their holidays or work travel, they travel with that pollution environmental mind. Let's just say it's
Mm.
pollution. It could be overfishing, could be anything. But I
Yeah.
think doing it with a true sense of values and actively involved is a lot better and more effective than just looking for accreditation. It has a real sense of meaning.
Yeah, I agree. And it asked some things I was reflecting on there as you were speaking was, um, I think it's easier for startups to look at things like the SDGs and really embrace them and make that part of their purpose. I think what's proven difficult is organizations that have maybe been established for quite some time. And so there's a big thing around influence there. So I would imagine that a lot of people that come to hear you speak are like-minded, and people that you talk to. But how do we, in your opinion, how do we get that? How do we communicate with people that maybe aren't like-minded? Or organizations even, how can we influence those people and those
I think
organizations?
that's a great one, Dan. Naturally, because we have this sort of echo chamber. Where we reinforce everything, don't we? And when we go online and go on social media, we tend to reinforce our own
Yeah.
opinions so much. And you're dead right. I've given hundreds and hundreds of talks where I've looked out there and thought to myself, everybody here gets it. How do we reach everybody else? And I think
Yeah.
you
That
can't
doesn't.
go wrong with going to values. What are the values? Because even if somebody doesn't understand or care to understand or doesn't have the energy or the interest in looking at, say, environmental issues or sustainability issues, they will have values of their own. They will have some core values. And let's just say those values are something to do with human rights. Let's say it's something to do with freedom of speech. Could be
Mm.
anything that is the sort of trigger, is a sort of sense of, oh yeah, these are my values, a sense of fair play. I'm back to the classic line of pollution and over extraction from the planet and all these
Mm.
other things, clean air.
Mm.
Um, and then when they look at their values and have a quick understanding of their values, then it helps, and it's a high motivator if everything they buy or do, they check the values. So let's say you and me, Dan, we're off and we're gonna, between us, we're gonna invest in something. Then
Mm.
when we meet people, we shouldn't look at what the investment rate of return is. We should first look at their values. What are your values? So when we
Mm.
sit down with that mortgage broker, insurance broker, investment analyst, or what are your values? And I dream of the day when we look at people's values first rather than their business results. So when you're buying a new washing machine or you're renting a new car or whatever you're doing, you should look at values.
Mm.
And if a company isn't displaying its values, then I think that's a red flag. And it can be quite the motivator. It can be quite sharp way of engaging people is by analyzing values. I mean, we don't do it enough when we look at politicians or when we elect school boards or local councillors or when we elect business leaders. We don't look at values enough. And I would love to see the day that when we elect politicians on the voting form, instead of Conservative, Labour, Liberal, it listed that person's values and it said,
Mm,
Dan, highly engaged in these activities, not just as an investor or a supporter, but physically at the front line. This man is out there ground truthing the planet for himself. He's traveled to these areas, physically got his hands dirty doing this for many, many months. And he just happens to be your local councillor candidate. You go, well, I'll vote for Dan any day than someone that just puts up some business school qualifications and has spent
yeah.
their life in politics. You see what I mean? I think going with values as the first one, and then looking at your own personal networks. If people start looking at their personal networks as to how they can make those values and that values driven life be more easily understood and shared,
Hmm.
then they start using their family and networks better, their neighbors, their business partners, and all this kind of stuff. So I think to get other people listening, we have to go with values first and then not be afraid to get stuck into bits of society you normally wouldn't. What about, musicians,
Yeah.
famous musicians, famous artists, architects, people in different jobs doing different activities. These are the kind of people we want to get stuck into. So
Mm,
I think the more you do that with a values driven exercise, the more chance of success you have. It's like us when we talk about marine protected areas to fishermen, we don't talk about marine protected areas, we talk about fish.
yeah. Well,
So,
I mean, you're right. There's lots of people. There's lots of people out there, famous people that have been doing their best to kind of use their platforms. I mean, I think of two in particular. You mentioned artists there. Coldplay, I think, kind of
mm,
made a bit of a political statement where they said we're going to stop touring until we can make it more sustainable to actually tour. Because of course, putting on a show around the world in various venues is going to have a footprint, right? So I think there was and then of course I think Leonardo DiCaprio has often used his whatever speech time he might have at any awards that he might have won, which I know famously he didn't win an Oscar for a long time, but when he did, I think he maximized on that opportunity to kind of speak about, we need to be acting now for the planet. So yeah, there's definitely people of influence there. I was also interested to hear about what you're talking about, the when we go to buy things and when we go to and looking at values. And I sort of thought back to a couple of previous episodes that we've done where John Maddy, who you might know,
yes.
you might remember, he said exactly the same thing, and it's like when he was setting up his business, and that being at the forefront. So we talked about startups, not always going with the cheapest thing, going with the right thing, and that was a big thing there for him. But then I
Mm,
also, on the contrary, I was thinking back to again another episode where it's easier for a certain uh, class of people to be able to do that. It's not always easy for everyone of every economic background to be able to make those choices. Sometimes you have to go with the cheapest thing, and you have to go, and so it's and that, but that doesn't stop values. That doesn't stop if you. There's still, and that maybe is where not it's just an interesting conversation there. It's like how do we create an environment for people from every economic background to be able to make a positive difference on the world? That was just something I thought of, and that's not
you,
necessarily a question for right now because I think it's
no,
a big question. But
no, I
yeah,
love it though,
certainly a
Dan.
fascinating topic.
I love it though, Dan, because yes, we've all been there, and you think, oh Jesus, I'd love to do this with my
Mm,
principles and values in mind, but I just can't flip and afford it. I just don't have the money. Then I think the
yeah,
way to do it is to buy the cheap one so you can continue life with a reasonable style, but do it under protest. I don't think there's anything wrong with
yeah,
doing it under protest. So
yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
social media so effective, so I went to this shop. my values are here, and yet the only thing open to me at the moment, given my current financial circumstances, is to buy this. It leaves a
Yeah.
bitter taste in my mouth. I
Yeah.
hate it, and I'm doing it under protest because these businesses are sharp, and they see that kind of thing, and that's
Yeah.
an opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly is. And so I suppose then going back to that kind of individual, if you were to give, say, we've got somebody watching or listening to this going, okay, I'm in my organization, I've seen an opportunity for change and to make a positive difference. However, I don't feel like I'm in that position to be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm not in that part of the organization, but say there's that person that's there. So what advice maybe would you give that person to go, okay, this is how you can start to make that positive difference?
Yeah, so that's a great one, Dan. Well, I would say, that to remind people that they really are in a position to make change. If they
Mm.
feel that they're not in a position to make change, it's one of those moments in life where you need a little bit of bravery to say, actually, it's my voice. It's as valid as anybody else's voice, and so
Yeah,
I'm going to put something up. Maybe there is sensitivity within business. Maybe there are confidentiality agreements. Maybe there's non-disclosure agreements. Could be anything. But there's typically a way around your voice being heard, and particularly if it's done in a non-threatening, involving educational kind of ways. Like say, did you know that this is happening and that's in our sphere of influence? Did you
yeah,
know that this is happening globally and we're
yeah,
in this business that is part of that? And
yeah,
shouldn't we do something about it? Should we
yeah,
should we learn more about it? Should we address these values? Should we send people to look themselves? What can we do? And just sort of
yeah.
open up a non-confrontational discussion. And that voice, that
That's it.
individual voice, is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, that non-confrontation, I think, is that key bit because, and that is
Yeah.
interesting that the protest, it's that personally, if I was to be protesting about something, my style wouldn't be to get kind of angry about it personally, because I just it's not within my nature. But there's certainly I do feel that, and especially is because you know, in my opinion, you could go up to something, and as soon as you get angry about something, about whoever you're being angry towards, whether that's or in front of, maybe they're going to put up a barrier, right? So they're
Yes.
going to go into fight or flight mode. Whereas if you kind of have an open and, as you say, non-confrontational conversation or dialogue, then immediately there's a way of getting to it because you want to do it for the good of the bigger picture, not necessarily just So there's, I think that's some sound advice there.
And
Um,
also do your homework. And what makes it easy
yeah,
to be non-confrontational? If someone's really done their homework and says, I've spent the last couple of months carefully reading through this. I met Tom, Dick, and Harry,
yeah,
and take a look at this and see what you think. Then when that person reads it, even if it's pretty bad news for them, if it's delivered in the sense of, look, I've read all this, I'm no expert,
yeah,
but look, what do you think? Then the person's indisputable scientific facts,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and it can start this swell. And when people begin to use their own networks, their neighbours, their friends in the tea room, their work colleagues, family, you soon build up a sense of support from like-minded individuals in your close network.
yeah. That's it. Sphere of influence, as you've said. You're absolutely
Hmm.
right. I wanted to ask you about, because as a person that's been all around the world and arguably what we would define as on a lot of adventures, I wanted to kind of talk because we at Impact talk a lot about adventure, but have this interesting way of talking about it because as soon as you hear the word adventure, you can often think of a certain, as you people like yourself going off on expeditions and having adventures, but we often then talk about, an adventure could be a drive home in a storm, So I wanted to find out, and I suppose I wanted to relate it back to organizations. Firstly, what does adventure mean to you, and how could adventure be harnessed by organizations and individuals within them?
Yeah, that's a great one, Dan. I mean, for me, I've always felt that a fast way of defining adventure is a sense of personal responsibility when
Mm,
you really feel it. You know, it's that it may be a climb that's been done thousands of times before. It may be that drive home in those terrible conditions that millions of people are doing. But
Yeah.
if you're feeling that personal responsibility, really genuinely feeling it, then it's an adventure.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed that because I've had big trips in very remote areas that don't feel actually very adventurous. It feels a bit like someone else's trip. It's just all happening. And then I've had other very short experiences that there's no doubt about it. This is a whopping great adventure. So there's a sense of personal responsibility which highlights to me that it's an adventure. There's no place to hide.
Mm.
In modern society, you can hide and survive with minimum performance in all kinds of places. You can easily cruise along, putting no personal energy, no risk in some work environments, and most definitely in some social environments these days. But when you're in an adventure, when you've got this heightened sense of personal responsibility,
Mm.
and you feel that there's no place to hide.
Yeah, stepping out of your comfort zone. That's a big
Oh
part of
yeah.
it, isn't it? Yeah, the and I think as soon as you can do that in any situation and I suppose in a way that goes back to what we were talking about just before about, say you're in a position where you want to make positive change in an organization, there's that element of courage that you talked about, that you have to step outside your comfort zone, something you're not used to, you're not playing it safe all the time. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden you kind of go on this metaphorical or in some cases real life journey where you then have to, and yeah, go on adventure within your own work and that to achieve that higher sense of purpose. So that's,
Yeah, and it's
yeah,
a
I
it's
think
a
that's what
beautiful
we've often tried
life-giving
to,
thing, it's a
yeah,
beautiful
yeah,
life-giving thing particularly when it only just works.
yeah,
When you've, say, "Whoa, we just made that," and that sense of elation and achievement of getting through an adventurous moment in your life
yeah.
is a lovely, beautiful thing.
And I suppose also because with going with approaching it in a sort of any sort of challenge or something you might want to achieve with an adventurous mindset, I think you then open up to it might not go right all the time. And I think that's really key, being open to making mistakes and it being all part of it, that experience. In fact, that quite neatly leads me on to my next question, really, because in your career, you've trained all types of people, US Navy to small groups on expeditions. So I'm curious to know, we talked a little bit there about learning from experience. So what's your take on experiential learning as a methodology? Do you find it effective, or do you think there's a particular case for it, particular scenario, or where maybe experiential works better than others? What do you think?
Well, I'm a bit biased here, Dan, because it's the only way I've ever learned anything.
Right,
I've
sure.
yeah. I couldn't learn as a young boy. I hadn't got the skills to learn. I hadn't learned enough to learn, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Struggled like hell in school. Could not sit at those desks. All that stuff on the blackboard made no sense. The books, the class structure.
yeah,
Um, was something I didn't like and couldn't do, and fell into that group of bad lads. I couldn't have said it in them days, but the race to the bottom. We were all the more trouble we were in, and the worse we got, the more satisfied with ourselves we were.
yeah,
And teachers were the enemy, and that meant that any learning was the enemy. And it took me, right up until I was sort of 15, 16 before I actually had skills enough to learn. So I learned by doing. I
yeah,
learnt by outward bound courses. I learnt by our geography teacher taking us to the Brecon Beacons and many weeks of cleaning boots and going high and walking. And I learnt by doing, and that
yeah,
and my apprenticeship as a toolmaker at Ford's was all about doing. And I like that physical, practical sense of learning something experientially. And even now, I'm now a good reader and a writer, unbelievably, and I do a huge amount of admin, and I'm happy to do it. But it's the kind of thing I could not have foreseen myself doing as a young
mm,
man. So I'm a huge believer in getting out there, ground truthing the planet for ourselves, ground truthing and understanding issues that we care about by being out there and getting our hands dirty
Yeah.
and taking on changes. If we want to develop and change and grow, then I feel the best way of doing it is by experiential learning,
Mm,
actual learning it, because it's a methodology, if you like, but it's so simple. You can
mm,
call it methodology, makes it appear complex, but it isn't. It's just doing it and trying it. So if someone says, "Well, we need you're going to improve your management, leadership, your teamwork, whatever it might be, your attention to
mm,
detail," then the way to do that is to get involved by physically giving it a go, not sitting
yeah.
there reading a book or taking an online course. You've got to physically get out there and take your bruises and your lumps and give it a
Yeah.
try.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's particularly poignant when it comes to things like leadership and, a lot of the things that uh, a particular impact we work on. The, I mean, you wouldn't learn to drive a car but in a classroom necessarily, but there are, and so, by that nature, why should we there are, in some cases, there are ways that we're expected to learn to be a leader through in that type of environment or online and that type of thing. Until you actually do it and experience it for yourself, that's where the real learning comes in and the real power of it comes in. So I think that's a key thing for us, certainly. Um, I've got two more questions for you, and then sadly I'm going to have to say goodbye. But it's been fascinating already. So uh, let's um, let's look towards the future, and uh, let's end on a positive note, because we talked about some sort of, in some cases, some of the darker sides of things of going on in the world at the moment. So let's look at something to uplift us. So what good news stories are you seeing or hearing at the moment? That what hope is there for the future?
Well, the first that always springs to mind is this amazing sense of global awareness. I've never seen such a high level of awareness across
Yeah.
all global issues. I mean, it's truly unbelievable, and it's obviously a very, very good thing. I mean, social media is a pretty good target, and we all have negative views, and we've spoken about social media, and we see the
Mm,
damage it can do. With fake news and bad advice being so accessible, but it's a very powerful force for good. And we have to
mm,
remember that social media is still new. It hasn't been around very long when you think about the age of us and the age of global communications. We're still learning how to use it. And I think that the social media is a huge, powerful tool for everybody. You can be disabled, you can be young, you can be old, you can have hardly any money, you can be living in very, very challenging personal circumstances, and yet you can be connected globally.
mm,
And you imagine that. So when we talk about, protected areas, when we talk about pollution, when we talk about corruption, when we talk about fake news, when we talk about fair play and human rights, people are actively involved in that same level of news as all of the billionaires and those well-connected politicians. So I think that is something that we do need to celebrate. And the second part of that is the young ones, because of all of that and because of the education system and this 24-hour news cycle that we're into and the
mm,
accessibility of information, then the young ones have got strong values and strong opinions, and they can get them out there. When I was a teenager, the only thing I could do with my big views was either shout about them in the pub or go on the ban the bomb march to Trafalgar Square or whatever I
yeah.
was doing. You couldn't actually reach thousands and thousands of people. And because
Mm,
these young ones are so well informed and they have a good set of strong values, it terrifies politicians and business leaders. They look at
mm,
these future voters and think, wow, I need to adopt some of those values and some of those changes that I can, or I'll be out of a job. They're
mm,
literally terrified. So when we talk about empowering the youth, they're already very well empowered because the politicians and business leaders are looking at them and going, oh my God, in 2 years, this lot are going to be voting. I'd better get ready. If I want to stay in my
Unless,
job, I
yeah.
need to change a few things. So I think that the social media aspect, the global awareness, and the values demonstrated by the young ones give me a vast amount of hope, and we should all celebrate that.
That's fascinating. And again, we could open up a whole can of worms talking about social media and I think again, as you was talking there, one thing that I remember when politicians started to use Twitter and it being this big thing, because of course it didn't seem appropriate when that politicians should be communicating on a platform that was, you can't lead a country in 140 characters or less. So it's like, and yet at the same time, one of the most powerful positions in the world was filled by someone who was a heavy user of Twitter,
Well,
or
this is
X
it.
as it's now called. So it
Yeah,
just goes to show the power of social media, and you would like to think that it would always, or as much as possible, be used for good. And I think you're right. There are signs of social media being used for good in the world
oh
out
yeah.
there. So it
That
is,
combined with this amazing level of awareness of global issues by
mm-mm,
everybody, I think is a terrific thing. And
yeah,
yeah, I stand in front of lots of young ones all the time, and you see them, and you go, "Yep, we've got it." It's a
yeah,
great
super
sense of
powerful.
positive uplift.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. A lot to think about there. So, one final question to you, which is the same question that we ask all of our guests, and this might be quite a hard one for you, possibly, or maybe it's not. I don't know. But the question we always ask at the end of our episodes is: if you were to start your career again, what, if anything, would be the best piece of advice you would give yourself?
It's something I've thought about, Dan, and I would say to myself, uh, uh, Paul Rose, you're really good at getting your head down and running at things.
Mm,
But just remember that life doesn't have to be a battle. It's quite okay to be in your comfort zone at least some of the time.
yeah, that's true. Imagine if we all always just spent time out of our comfort zone. I don't know. You'd be exhausted, wouldn't you?
And fighting everything, you know.
Yeah. Sometimes it's nice to just sit in front of the telly and go to bed at 9 o'clock.
I
Yeah.
realise that now. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
taken me a
Yeah.
while, Dan, but I've got it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you ever so much for spending time with us today. We super appreciate it, especially with how busy you are. And your, there's been so much to take away from today's episode that I would wish we could spend more time with you, because I think we could easily fill a couple of hours at least. So one bonus question is, what you're working on at the minute that you can talk about, and what should we expect to see or hear you in soon?
That's it. I'm getting ready for the next expedition I lead, which is the Solomon Islands in Melanesia, the southwestern part of the Pacific. And so we've got the whole team currently working in Palau. They'll move down to Papua New Guinea, and then I'll pick up the ship in the Solomon Islands. So I'm going to Solomon Islands in a couple of weeks on a reconnaissance mission to check everything out and meet our partners and the indigenous leaders there. And then October, November, I'll be back in the Pacific to lead that expedition. In the meantime, my role as head of expeditions is to keep all the expeditions going, but
Yeah.
not actually be physically on every one, because it's just impossible. So there you go. And also trying to keep my my head lined up on all these different time zones I'm working on.
And also trying to find time to sit in front of the TV and go to bed at 9 o'clock.
That's it. That's the one.
Amazing. Well, I wish you all the best with that, and I'm sure it'll be even more amazing trips. So that just leaves me to thank Paul Rose again for joining me today. And if you'd like to find out anything more about Paul or Impact, or you'd like to connect with either of us on LinkedIn, you'll find all of the links that you need in the description. That leaves me finally to say, if you haven't yet already gone back and looked or listened to any of our previous episodes, then again, all of the links that you will need are in the description of wherever you found this episode. So thank you again to Paul, and until the next time, take care.